Yes, so Kew Gardens and the Natural History Museum in 2023. It's interesting the ideas that are being imposed on it. But anyway, I do love to go to Kew Gardens and see all sorts of beautiful things. And they have all sorts of exotic things. And as John and I often like to joke, they're almost as good as ours, because back at Jurassic Ark in Queensland, we have things like this. So do come along and see them. You don't have to go to Kew Gardens. You can come to Jurassic Ark and see lovely things like this and exotic things and brilliant examples of God's creation. This was a rather nice example here. Whoever thought that brown flowers could be beautiful? But this was the most lovely cascade in the tropical greenhouse there. And we also like very much fond of orchids, so I always look out to see the orchids and see whether they're as good as ours, and these were almost as good as ours. But one of the things I really wanted to see was the giant Amazonian water lily. And in the water lily house and also in the tropical greenhouse, they had these giant Amazonian water lilies. And I was very pleased to see that this one had a flower out, because the flowers are very short-lived, actually. They only live for a few days or sometimes less. And this one had a flower out. But of course, the most distinctive things about the giant Amazonian water lily is the enormous leaves. And they really are huge. And you can see the difference between the big Amazonian water lily leaves and the normal size water lily leaves in the rest of this this little pond here. And we wrote about these a few years ago, because recently some engineers and biologists got together and studied the giant Amazonian water lilies. So if you'd like to read about those, you can go to our fact file and read about the biomechanics of these leaves, and the brilliant pieces of design. But as I said, there's a trend these days to impose current political ideas onto just about everything these days. And when you come to the main gate at Kew Gardens, this was what you were confronted with. Every season they have some sort of special exhibition. And this is the special exhibition they had for this autumn. It's called Queer Nature. Now, they weren't using the word queer in the traditional way. To me, queer means just something that's a bit strange. They were using queer in the modern politically correct concept, where it is, quote unquote, there you can see, celebrating diversity in art, plants and fungus. And fungi. And well, yes, there is certainly huge diversity in art, plants and fungi, but there was one particular type of diversity they were interested in. And this is from their little brochure that they give out when you come in. Queer Nature, celebrating diversity in art, plants and fungi. And it was all to enable people from the LGBTQ plus community to come and present their ideas. And in their little brief thing, they had their why queer nature at Kew. We know that understanding nature is one way we can better understand ourselves. Now, this was an idea that we briefly touched on when we looked at the whole idea of worldviews and how we understand the nature of human beings. And so what they are presenting is that because plants reproduce in different ways, and a lot of plants, of course, a lot of flowering plants have both male and female structures within the same plant. Therefore, they are non-binary. Therefore, that tells us what about things that are natural. And because human beings are just natural, well, we can apply that to human beings, which, of course, is a very different way of looking at human beings from a biblical point of view, which tells us that human beings are very different from the natural world in some ways. And if we really want to understand them, we need to understand where human beings come from. But it does relate to a question that we have had in the past about whether certain behaviours occur in the animal world, therefore they're natural and therefore human beings can carry them out. But I've never seen this applied to plants. But anyway, it's the same logic. And if you do want to have a look at the question that we got a few years ago about whether things that happen in the natural world can automatically be applied to human beings, you can look up this question on the Ask John Mackay site. That's our question and answer site. So very interesting way that modern politics and modern cultural ideas are even being imposed on the plants and the fungi. Now, another idea that's been imposed on the natural world as it is an older idea, and that, of course, is the idea of evolution, which is another topic that we talk a lot about in these programs. And Kew Gardens has actually set up an evolution garden. And this is the entrance to it, or the sign at the entrance. Now, notice at the top there, they're saying that this area here is the science precinct. It is in an area at Kew Gardens where they do a lot of their basic research in botany. And they have a series of gardens set out according to the classification system. So this diagram at the bottom there is actually a diagram of the classification system of plants. But notice they've set it up in the shape of a tree. And this is something that happened when the theory of evolution became very popular. Already we had started to classify plants and animals according to their different features. And that is a good and useful thing to do, in that we helps us to understand the natural world. We look at how things are similar, how things are different, and we like to organize our knowledge. And the evolutionists took over this whole classification system and made it into this evolutionary tree, where they're saying, now, this is not just how we organize our knowledge. This is meant to be a picture of how things have actually originated and grown and developed. And so it's full of signs like this. This is about non-flowering plants. And so in that garden, they have a whole lot of things like cycads and conifers and various other plants that don't produce flowers, that don't reproduce by flowers. Now, cycads are interesting. They are considered to be one of the oldest non-flowering plants, but here they are growing today, looking exactly like cycads. So in fact, what this sign here is illustrating is not evolution. It's actually illustrating after their kind, where the way they've set out these gardens, they've got them in their different kinds, flowering plants, non-flowering plants, different types of flowering plants, all nicely organized according to the classification system. And they're just showing us how things have multiplied after their kind. So it's an interesting garden to go and visit. Go and have a look at it. And you'll see wonderful evidence for things multiplying after their kind, irrespective of how old you think they are. Now, of course, the person who originally set up this classification system was very interested in plants. In fact, the original work that he did was mainly with plants, although the system he set up also applies to animals and fungi. And that was Carl Linnaeus, or Carolus Linnaeus, if you want to fully Latinize his name. And over at the Natural History Museum, they have a little corner up on one of the mezzanine floors, tucked away, where they have a little bit about the history of science. And so they have a number of just little displays or little posters about some of the people involved in the history of the museum and in the history of science. And so Carl Linnaeus rates a little bit of a mention here. And this is a quote from him that the natural sciences, in the natural sciences, principles of truth ought to be confirmed by observation. And that was one of the bases for setting up the Natural History Museum, in that people could come along and see actual specimens of fossils and preserved living things, see the natural world. But of course, if we go back to what's going on over here at Kew Gardens, all of the plants that are growing in those gardens can be observed, but they can only ever be observed to be multiplying after their own kind. So the observations that Carl Linnaeus wanted to show people are that things do multiply after their kind and they don't evolve. However, the Natural History Museum has now become a cathedral of evolution, even though the original scientists who wanted to set it up really wanted it to be a cathedral to nature. And the most prominent of these was the very man who set up the museum in the first place, Sir Richard Owen. And his statue, which is this black statue here, used to be in the place of most prominence when you go into the museum and you look up the main staircase, where they now have a statue of Charles Darwin. Well, they used to have Richard Owen there, but at the Darwin anniversary in 2009, they moved Charles Darwin there, and they shifted Richard Owen up into this shadowy corner up on the mezzanine floor, and you've actually got to go deliberately looking for him. And but they do have a display of the history of the museum, the actual setting up of it. And so they have these little quotes and little vignettes about the people who were involved. And this is what they have beside a picture of Richard Owen. He wanted to set up what he called an index museum, which showed things in their taxonomic or their classification groups. And because it's set up in a corner here, which is dark but has odd reflections coming through the windows above it, it's very hard to get a proper photo of it. So I've just taken another shot of that first paragraph there next to his name. And this is what it said, that Owen held strong ideas about how public displays should be arranged in his new museum. His concept for what he called an index museum involved using the bays surrounding the cathedral-like central hall. The original people who wanted this museum set up described it as being a cathedral to nature. But this is a modern take of on what Owen and his colleagues wanted, and they said it was to display representative species of several taxonomic, that's classification groups, that Owen believed had been shaped by an evolution dictated by God. Now, that is not what Owen believed at all. Owen was actually an opponent of Charles Darwin. He did believe that things were created by God, but certainly not by the evolutionary process. So again, we have modern ideas being imposed on history and upon the living world. So it's really important that when we go to places like this, we can learn a lot, but we do need to exercise discernment. And so if